You are a grieving widow. Your husband of 9 years has just died suddenly in your bed. You have three young boys who don't understand where their father went. You are devastated. You are broken. And so you do what any loving, heartbroken mother might do. You sit down with your children and you write a book together. A children's book about loss, about love, about how the people we lose never really leave us. You publish it. You go on local radio. You go on TV. You talk about your husband with tears in your eyes, and you tell the world that writing this book brought your family a little piece of peace during the darkest chapter of your lives. The book is called Are You With Me? It is sweet. It is tender. It is the kind of thing that makes people say, "What a remarkable woman. What a devoted mother." And then the police come knocking. Because the toxicology report sitting in a lab in Utah has just confirmed something that changes absolutely everything. Eric Richins did not die of natural causes. He died from a dose of fentanyl so powerful, 5 times the amount needed to kill a grown man, that whoever administered it did not want him sick. They wanted him gone. Completely. Permanently. Without question. And the only person who had the means, the motive, the opportunity, and the intimate access to a man in his own home was the woman who had just published a book about how much she missed him. This is the story of Curry Richins. And from the very first detail, nothing about it is what it looks like. From the outside, Curry and Eric Richins had the kind of life that people scroll past on Instagram and quietly envy. They lived near Park City, one of the most beautiful and affluent areas in the American West, famous for ski resorts, clean mountain air, and the kind of neighborhoods where the houses have 3-car garages and the lawns are always immaculate. Eric was 39 years old, a hardworking man with a straightforward character. Friends described him as a dedicated father, a loyal husband, a genuinely decent person. He and Curry had been married since 2013, and had built a family with 3 boys together. Curry, by all appearances, was the engine of the household's social ambition. She ran a house-flipping business, buying properties, renovating them, selling them for profit. She dressed well. She presented herself as successful and polished. She was the kind of woman who made everything look effortless, the kind of person you assumed had everything figured out. But behind that presentation, the financial reality was catastrophic. By the time Eric Richins died in March 2022, Curry's real estate business was not just struggling, it was imploding. A forensic accountant who testified at her trial laid out the numbers with clinical precision. On the day after her husband's death, Curry Richins had a net worth of negative $1.6 million. Her business had accumulated debts of approximately $4.5 million. She owed money in multiple directions. She was behind on payments. The entire structure she had built to project success was collapsing underneath her. But she had a plan. Or at least, she believed she did. Eric Richins had life insurance. Multiple policies. And Curry had quietly taken out additional policies on him without his knowledge, including one application that contained errors so significant that investigators later describe it as fraudulent, including an incorrect social security number for her own husband. Together, the policies amounted to approximately $2.2 million. There was just one problem with her plan, and it was a problem she didn't know about until it was far too late. Eric Richins had quietly updated his will. At some point in the years before his death, he had apparently discovered that some of the debt accumulating in the background had been racked up in his name without his consent. And he had responded by removing Curry from his estate. His assets had been placed in a trust, overseen by one of his sisters. Curry Richins believed that killing her husband would make her rich. She had done the calculations. She had run the numbers. She had decided that the money waiting on the other side of his death was worth more than the marriage, worth more than the family, worth more than the man himself. What she had not accounted for was the fact that the inheritance she was betting everything on no longer existed. To understand exactly how calculated this was, you need to understand the timeline. Because this was not a single moment of rage. This was not one terrible decision made in a dark night of desperation. This was a process, one that unfolded over weeks with patience and with a chilling degree of deliberate planning. February 14, 2022. Valentine's Day. Eric Richins received a sandwich from his wife. He ate it, and within hours, he became violently ill, sick enough to need attention, sick enough to be frightening. But he recovered, and at the time, nobody thought to ask too many questions. People get sick. Food can disagree with you. There was no obvious reason to suspect anything other than an unfortunate coincidence. But prosecutors would later argue that the Valentine's Day incident was not a coincidence at all. It was a trial run. According to the evidence presented at trial, Curry Richins had obtained fentanyl pills from a housekeeper named Sasha Lauber, who was connected to a drug supply chain. Curry had paid for the pills. She had received them. She had used them on her husband on Valentine's Day, and the dose had not been sufficient to kill him. And so, according to the prosecution, she went back to Lauber and asked for something stronger. She picked up the second batch of pills on February 26th. 6 days later, Eric Richins was dead. The night of March 4th, 2022, Curry and Eric Richins had a drink together at home. According to notes written in Curry's own handwriting and found by investigators in the family home, the couple shared a Moscow Mule cocktail and a lemon drop shot. They were celebrating a small achievement in Curry's real estate business, one of those intimate, quiet moments that a married couple might have on an ordinary evening. When Curry called 911 the following morning, she told the dispatcher that she had woken up to find Eric unresponsive in bed. Her voice on the call would later be played in court and dissected by prosecutors who pointed to the specific way she described her location at the time of death, distancing herself from the moment, from the room, from him. The autopsy results confirmed what no grieving wife should ever have to hear about her husband. Eric Richins had enough fentanyl in his system to kill 5 men. It was not medical-grade fentanyl. It was illicit fentanyl, street fentanyl, the kind that does not end up in a person's body by accident. The investigation that followed would take over a year. But what investigators found during that time built a case so layered, so detailed, and so damning that by the time it reached a courtroom in 2026, the jury needed only 3 hours to reach their verdict. Here is the detail that made this case impossible to look away from. While investigators were quietly building their case against Curry Richins throughout 2022 and into 2023, she was not lying low. She was not staying quiet. She was not doing the thing that people who are afraid of being caught tend to do. She was promoting a children's book. In early 2023, Curry Richins self-published Are You With Me? A picture book about a child dealing with the loss of a parent. She gave interviews. She appeared on local radio. She told a national public radio affiliate in Utah that writing the book had brought her family peace. She positioned herself publicly as a widow transformed by grief into something meaningful. The book was her alibi. Not a legal alibi, but an emotional one. It said, look at this woman. Look at what she built from her pain. Does this look like a killer to you? She was arrested in May 2023. When investigators examined the digital evidence from her devices, what they found was extraordinary in its brazenness. After police seized her original phone, Curry Richins began using a new device. And on that new device, she searched the following things. What is a lethal dose of fentanyl? Can the FBI find deleted messages? If someone is poisoned, what does it go down on the death certificate as? And in a detail that stunned observers when it was read aloud in court, she had also searched the phrase, luxury prisons. Those searches were not made before the crime. They were made after. After her husband was already dead. After the investigation had begun. While she was still giving interviews about her grief memoir. The phone evidence went further. Hundreds of text messages between Curry Richins and Sasha Lauber, the housekeeper who prosecutors say supplied the fentanyl, had been deleted from both their devices. But digital forensics recovered the metadata, the timestamps, the evidence that the messages had existed. Investigators reconstructed the communication trail well enough to establish the timeline of the drug purchases. There is also a letter. Found in Kouri Richins' jail cell after her arrest, the letter appeared to contain scripted testimony, instructions to her mother and brother about what to say in her defense. It included a suggestion that her brother should tell attorneys that Eric had confided in him about obtaining fentanyl from Mexico and that he used drugs regularly. The defense argued the letter was a piece of fiction their client was writing. Prosecutors argued it was a coordinated attempt to construct a false narrative and point the blame at the man who was no longer alive to contradict it. And then there was the prenuptial agreement. When Kouri and Eric married in 2013, they had signed a document establishing that neither would have rights to the other's property, with one exception. If Eric died while they were still lawfully married, his estate would pass to Kouri. It was the clause that prosecutors said had become the foundation of everything that followed. It was the legal thread that connected the debt, the insurance policies, and the death into a single, coherent, devastating motive. The prosecution's closing argument summarized it in one sentence. She wanted to leave Eric Richins. She did not want to leave his money. The trial of Kouri Richins opened in February 2026 and lasted 3 weeks. 42 witnesses took the stand. The prosecution built their case layer by layer: the financial desperation, the affair with another man, the drug purchases, the failed Valentine's Day attempt, the successful 116 days later, the digital searches, the deleted messages, the jail cell letter, and the children's book that had been presented to the world as evidence of love while investigators believe it was cover for murder. One witness described Kouri saying in December 2021, 3 months before her husband's death, that in many ways it would be better if Eric were dead. Another piece of evidence showed a text message she sent to her boyfriend in February 2022, just days after the alleged Valentine's Day poisoning attempt. The message read, "If he could just go away, and you could just be here, life would be so perfect." The defense called 0 witnesses. Not one. They rested their case without putting a single person on the stand, a decision that drew significant attention because it signaled either extraordinary confidence that the prosecution had not met its burden, or an acknowledgement that no witness could help Kouri Richins more than silence. The jury began deliberating in the late afternoon of March 16, 2026. 3 hours later, they returned. Guilty on all 5 counts. Aggravated murder. Attempted aggravated murder for the Valentine's Day incident. Forgery. 2 counts of insurance fraud. When the verdict was read aloud, Kouri Richins bowed her head. She did not cry. She did not react. She sat completely still. Outside the courthouse, Eric's sister Amy spoke briefly. She said the family was in shock, that it had been a long time coming, that they were grateful for justice for her brother. She said Eric had so much more life to live and that he had wanted so much for his boys. Now here is the detail that takes this story somewhere darker than almost anyone noticed. In the original search warrant filed by investigators, the detective noted that Kouri Richins' mother, Lisa Darden, had been flagged as potentially involved in planning the crime. The affidavit also noted that Darden had, years earlier in 2006, been living with a romantic partner who died unexpectedly. An autopsy at the time had determined a cause of that death was oxycodone toxicity. No charges were filed in that case. It remains, officially, a historical footnote, but the detail sits there, unresolved, in the court record. During the Richins trial, defense attorneys made multiple unusual motions attempting to have legal counsel appointed for Darden, an extraordinary step that legal observers said suggested she could face potential exposure if compelled to testify. Those motions were filed and then sealed by the court. What Lisa Darden knew when she knew it, and what role she may or may not have played, none of that has been fully resolved in a courtroom. Kouri Richins is scheduled for sentencing on May 13, 2026, what would have been Eric Richins' 44th birthday. She faces 25 years to life. She also faces a separate trial on 26 additional felony charges related to financial crimes, including mortgage fraud and money laundering. The grief book she wrote is still available online. The title is Still Are You With Me? There is a particular kind of horror in this case that goes beyond the crime itself. It is not just that a man was poisoned by the person who was supposed to love him most. It is not just the fentanyl or the insurance policies or the deleted messages. It is the book, the interviews, the careful, deliberate construction of a public image as a grieving mother, built on top of and possibly designed to obscure what prosecutors say was a calculated killing. Eric Richins was 39 years old. His boys were young enough that they may grow up with more memories of a grief book than of their father. The oldest was 10 when the book was published. He would have been old enough to read it with her, old enough to find comfort in it, old enough to believe, for a while at least, that his mother had poured her love into those pages for him. We will never know exactly what Eric knew or suspected before he died. We don't know what he was thinking when he raised that glass on the night of March 4th, 2022. We don't know whether he trusted her completely or whether somewhere in the back of his mind something felt wrong. What we do know is that he had already quietly changed his will, that he had seen enough to protect himself financially from the person he was still living with, that somewhere in that marriage, some part of him had understood that something was not right. He just didn't understand it in time. Sentencing is scheduled for May 13, 2026. This case is not finished. And if you want to follow what happens next, subscribe so you don't miss the update when it comes.